The point with doing a hobby is not to be the best at it. It's more to connect with a feeling that it brings you. I was able to develop that skill, and it's quite remarkable looking at my first sketchbooks to what I was able to do by the end. You probably have more talent than you realize. You're just not giving yourself a chance to develop it. And if you are looking at things that other people are creating, or you do wish that you could draw or paint a certain way, you absolutely can do it. We can so easily write ourselves off and think that, oh, I don't have the talent, I'm not like that, I'm not artistic. But it's like, you don't know yet. If you feel drawn in any way to paint something or draw something or sketch something, if you feel drawn to do that, give yourself a chance and commit to it for a month, 2 months, 3 months. You will see progress if you keep going with it. Hobbies are really important for spending time with yourself. Instead of scrolling on your phone, you can be like, oh, I want to do some more work on my painting. Hello, welcome. Today we're talking about how to enter your hobby girl era. As we're moving into winter, I thought this was the perfect time to start talking about hobbies. Yes, there are lots of outdoor hobbies you can do, but quite a few things that we're going to talk about are indoor things. This is the perfect time to get into those hobbies and work out what you like. If there's a big project you want to work on, if you want to try drawing and you want to try and draw a scene from your favorite film, or you want to try painting, now is the time. It's going to be darker in the evening, so you're going to have more time inside. And yes, it's a good idea in this season to prioritize lots of time with friends and family and people we feel connected to, because it can be very dark, and that can, at least I find, that affects my mood quite a lot. It can also be helpful to spend some time alone. It's a great use of your time as well. If on a random Saturday you're not doing anything in the evening and you start to feel like you're pathetic, or like it's really dark and you wish it was the summer again, it's nice to have a hobby to turn to. The first thing I want to address, this is not about being the best or comparing yourself to other people or expecting yourself to be really good at a specific thing. It doesn't have to be performative. A lot of things that we do, we can post online or post on Instagram, like our Instagram stories. We can share what we're doing. This is great. But the point with doing a hobby is not to be the best at it. It's more to connect with a feeling that it brings you, whether it just feels good to be creative and to draw something, or to make a collage, or just to scroll through Pinterest and find things to make a digital vision board. Like, it doesn't have to be a physical collage of cutting things out. It could be a digital thing, or you could find images on Pinterest, print them off and make a physical collage. The point is that this is not for anyone else. This is not to like make a piece of art that you then want to share with the world. It can be that, but at least to start with, if you're going to try and find a new hobby that you enjoy, it doesn't have to be for anyone else. This is not performative. This is not like, oh, look at my drawing, I've written this poetry and I want to monetize selling like zines. Anything to do with money or sharing, performance, comparison, that does not belong at the moment. This is about creating something for you and spending time for you. And this might be a bit of a foreign concept, because we hear so much about like hustling and like having a side hustle. Like, you don't just have to work, you've then got to do something else on top that you monetize, something that you do on the weekends or in the evenings, something extra. This is not that, and it might seem quite strange. You might be like, oh, this is a waste of time, why would I do this? But if you can find something that is like an enriching activity for you that you like to do, whether it's learning to sew or learning to draw, learning to paint, trying to do some yoga by yourself, like put on a yoga tutorial for beginners and just do that. It's not about being the best at something. It really helps to bring you into the moment and just spend time with yourself and work out who you want to be, learn a new skill. The progress that you can see is really rewarding if you commit to a specific hobby. So not only don't be performative about this, but don't expect to be good at first. Let's say you have seen lots of people sharing like fan art and you're like, oh, I would quite like to try drawing. Whether you just literally want to get like a pen and paper and draw something, or you want to try something on your iPad or whatever, you may have seen other people sharing what they've done. You're like, I want to try do something like that. Don't expect, if this is the first time you sat down to draw whatever scene or whatever landscape, don't expect to be good at it at the beginning. Take away any expectations, and the idea is just to be in the moment and concentrate on the photo you're trying to draw. You're learning a new skill. This is not supposed to be like you're already good at it. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but if you continue, the progress that you see is so rewarding, and it is really possible. Even if you start and you look at what you've drawn and you're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. That is just your first thing. Like, don't make a judgment on whether or not you're good at art or good at drawing just from the first thing you ever drew. Right? Like, when you're a child, you don't fall over when you try and walk and are then like, oh no, I'm bad at walking, I can't do this. Or if you like pick up a racket to play tennis and you then can't do it, you're not like, oh, I'm terrible at this, I give up. I think maybe as we get older, we lose like this persistence, or we expect things because we are so proficient at like, now we can just move around in a way that we couldn't, or we can speak in a way that you're not able to when you're a child and you have to learn all these things. We maybe take for granted that these things we can do now are all skills that we learn at some point. At some point, I was not able to sit down in front of a camera and talk like this. I used to have a script that I would read line by line and then perform the line and then pause and go back and read the next line, memorize that chunk and then say it to camera. Whereas now I just have an outline of points that I make, and the way I've got to this point of just being able to use my outline instead of making a whole script is through repetition, doing this again and again. It's very normal if you sit down to do something you've never done before to be like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing, or oh my gosh, this isn't as good as I thought it was going to be. That's not the point. The point is to spend time with that skill and develop it. The thing of it takes like 10,000 hours to be good at something. And especially with drawing, I can speak to this because I did art GCSE. So growing up, and this is a good way if you're trying to find a hobby, look back at what you enjoyed as a child. Growing up, I loved drawing. I loved art. And my mum said this when I decided to do art GCSE, because I didn't have to do that. You know, you have to do like maths or science or English, but I didn't have to do art, but I chose to do it. And my mum was like, growing up, you as a child would draw all the time. And then you learn how to write. And you slowly stopped drawing and switched to writing, because that was the way I could, you know, draw a little picture and tell a story through a picture. And so that skill, or that joy that I found through drawing, it then didn't go away, but it sort of just went to sleep for a bit. But when I did art GCSE, suddenly there was so much more time. So we had, I don't know if we had a long class or we had 2 art classes a week. We were expected to do quite a lot of homework and work on our sketchbooks at home. And suddenly, because I had both the classes and the time to commit to doing more art, I was able to develop that skill. And it's quite remarkable looking at my first sketchbooks to what I was able to do by the end. So there are a few lessons here that I want to say to you in terms of when you're starting a new hobby, particularly if it is something creative like drawing or painting or using like oil pastels or charcoal or whatever. 1, if you keep going, you will see progress because you will get better. So don't judge yourself on the first thing that you create. 2, I would say you do need to put time aside to do this. And yeah, probably at school, it's a bit easier to do that because it was literally timetabled in, and I would have to do then some homework because I knew I had my class and I knew I was going to have to show the work that I'd done, the progress that I'd made. So the lessons that you can take from that is maybe you can say every Thursday evening, you're going to do your hobby, do some drawing for an hour. And it shouldn't feel, it's difficult to talk about. It shouldn't necessarily feel like a chore. But when I think about people like my sister who has a hobby of running, there are definitely days where she probably doesn't feel like going for a run, but she does it anyway because she's got a plan that she's sticking to. She's training for an event. She does it anyway. We talked about like the discomfort of seeing, oh my gosh, I've just started this thing and I'm not as good as I wanted to be. Like I look at this drawing and I'm like, what have I done? The same discomfort I think maybe can apply in that you may not want to be always drawing or always painting. You may be like, oh, it's Thursday, I said I was going to do some drawing, but I don't really feel like it. And I think there is a fine line between like, I need to rest or do something else instead, and oh, if I pushed myself to do this, I know it would be rewarding. There are definitely some things that you don't have to do with any frequency. Like you can still get the benefit of drawing even if you just pick your sketchbook up once in a while. So I do this and I'm just like, it doesn't even have to be drawing a picture. You can draw something from your head. You can just draw shapes. It can be really therapeutic. So I'm not saying you have to have a schedule with it, but if you want to make progress like I'm talking about, a really easy way to do that is just be like, I'm doing this once a week, right? The same way that if you go to the gym, they'll be like, hey, come back next week and we can like work on this thing, right? The way you get better at something is you practice. So the same thing applies to drawing, but you don't have to do that. Another hobby that I had briefly was I liked making zines. So I was organizing poetry that I'd written years and years ago and turning them into these little booklets. I've not done that for a while now, but there was a point where that was so helpful because it gave me a little project to work on just for like 3 hours one evening. I was seized by this idea. I really wanted to do something creative. I felt so stuck in my own head and I felt really low. I was like, I'm just going to make a zine. And having that focus, creating something that didn't exist before, was such a rewarding process and really helped to get me out of that low mood. It's not like you must have a structure, you must do this once a week. You can absolutely just fall in and out of things and be like, yeah, today I feel like doing this, or this week I feel like sewing. Next week you feel like doing a puzzle while watching a film. The week after you want to draw or you want to paint. Like, it doesn't have to be consistent, but I would say that you probably have more talent than you realize. You're just not giving yourself a chance to develop it. And if you are looking at things that other people are creating, or you do wish that you could draw or paint a certain way, you absolutely can do it. You just need to devote the time to doing it. Like, we can think, oh, I'm not talented enough, because we're comparing ourselves to something that someone has made and they've been painting or making their art. They've been doing that for years and years. Like, of course, you're not going to be on exactly the same level, but that's not to say you can't get to that level. You just have to keep going, and you're not seeing this person's earlier work. So you're seeing this painting that they're selling, or this like digital print they're selling on Etsy. You're seeing that. You're not seeing the years of work that have led them to that point. Work is a really loose term here, because if it's something you really enjoy doing, yeah, there will be times where you're like, oh, I don't really feel like doing that, but I'll do it anyway just because I've not done as much as I'd like to this week. I've not made as much progress on this painting. You enjoy it, so it's work. But like making videos, I enjoy making videos. So yeah, sometimes I'm like, don't really feel like doing that, but I know it will bring me joy. It is something that I can work on that is outside of anything else. Like, I'm not being told you must do this, right? Whereas at work, you probably, unless you're a manager, well, I guess even if you are, you will have people above you who are telling you what to do. You have complete freedom to be like, I want to work on this today. I've seen this advert or this like photo in a magazine. I want to try and recreate that. Or I'm really interested in the color and whatever. And like all of these things as well, they will happen the more time you put into it. So you may at first, and this is why you have to practice, because you may at first look at something and be like, how do I draw this? I have no idea where to start. And you may then look at what you draw and you're like, I've done the proportions all wrong. I've done the shadows wrong. Like, how have I done that? But the way you are going to learn how to do shadows, learn how to do the right perspective, learn how to use color. So instead of when you're doing a shadow, you don't use like gray or black. You use tones of whatever color is in the painting. Like if you're doing the shadow of a tree, you're not doing black for the shadow or dark gray for the shadow. You're doing like tones of green and blue and red, even like whatever the shadow is falling on. Is it falling on grass? Is it falling on water? Is it falling on earth and dirt? The way you develop that awareness is through doing and practicing, and it shouldn't feel like a chore. And it won't feel like a chore if you are already feeling inclined to do this and you're like, I really would like to try and paint, because you keep seeing other people sharing their stuff and you're like, oh, I wish I could do that. Like, we can so easily write ourselves off and think that, oh, I don't have the talent, I'm not like that, I'm not artistic. But it's like, you don't know yet. If you feel drawn in any way to paint something or draw something or sketch something, if you feel drawn to do that, give yourself a chance and commit to it for a month, 2 months, 3 months. You will see progress if you keep going with it. I would also say though, if you try something, maybe you think, oh yeah, I'd love to paint something like that, and then you try that and you're actually like, this is boring, I don't like this. That's absolutely fine. Like, you tried something, that there was nothing lost from doing that. If anything, you've grown in awareness of yourself and you're like, oh, okay, I can appreciate someone else's talent. I can appreciate someone else's skill without trying to acquire that skill myself. Just because I feel like I want to do this doesn't mean that I'm actually going to enjoy it myself. It's kind of the same thing with like shopping that I've noticed now. I've made enough mistakes when I'm buying things that I don't actually need or use or really want, but it's an impulse buy. I'm now like, oh, when I see something that I feel compelled to buy, I can just look at that thing and be like, I appreciate that this object exists somewhere. I don't have to own it. I can just be like, oh, that's cool. That's cool that that exists. Nice. I don't have to spend my money on that. I don't have to own that. Same way you can move forward and be like, oh, I tried painting and I thought I'd like it, but I didn't. Now I don't have to feel any jealousy or inadequacy or comparison when I look at someone else who's sharing their art, because I tried that and I know it's not for me. You're learning about yourself. I think another key thing I want to say in terms of hobbies is do not at the outset spend loads of money on something, because for the reason we just said, you might try it for a week and be like, actually, I don't like drawing. Like, I just spent all this money on fancy pencils and I actually don't enjoy this. And it can be really tempting when we are getting into a new hobby to spend money instantly. We're basically trying to buy an identity instead of becoming that thing over time. Obviously, if you want to start drawing, you need a pen and paper, or you need, if you have your iPad already, you need the little pencil or whatever pen that you can draw properly. But this does not mean you have to go out and buy an iPad so you can draw on your iPad if you don't have one already. And you might be like, well, duh, but you can easily get caught up in this idea of like, oh, who would I be if I bought this thing? Who would I be? Right? And this is what a lot of marketing is about. It's like portraying this ideal version of you, and you look at that and be like, oh yeah, when I have that thing, I'll be like that, which we all know is not true, but it's so easy to buy into. Before you buy anything, one, look around, really like go through your room. Maybe from school you have some pencils in a random drawer that you completely forgot about. Maybe you can ask a friend. Maybe you can go look in a charity shop as well. If you believe that things happen for a reason, you may be like, yes, I would like to start drawing, and you start thinking about that and imagining that, and then you go to the charity shop and there's a set of pencils there and it's like, oh, that's for me. Maybe that's just a coincidence, but I find it better to try and find meaning in things. It helps me personally. You don't have to find meaning in everything, right? Sometimes things just happen, but for me it helps to find meaning where I can. And then you can use those pencils for a week, see how you get on. Maybe you don't like drawing, fine, you then give those pencils away, or you give them back to the charity shop and you're like, here, I'm donating these. If you do like them, then you get into drawing, and then you might think, oh, okay, I want to try this next. I want to, instead of drawing with pencils, I want to use different pens. You can get like brush pens. There are so many things. Don't go to the art shop until you've worked out you actually want to pursue this as a hobby. Because as well, if you just buy a bunch of stuff at the beginning because you're like, I want to be a painter. One, you may not actually like painting when you actually try and do it, or you may not make time for it in the way that you thought you would. It may be like more messy or just more annoying. You're like, oh wait, I can't just leave this and come back to it because the paint's going to dry. It's a different thing if you're using oil paints. I don't tend to use them because I don't like them as much. I really like using acrylic paint, but then you have to be aware that the paint does dry. But not only may you not like the thing, but also once you've done that hobby a bit and you've got into either painting or drawing, let's say, you may realize there are things that you need that you hadn't even been aware of at the beginning. Or if you had bought the stuff at the beginning, you may have bought stuff that you didn't need. So you may have gone into the art shop being like, oh yes, I need this brush and this brush and this brush. And then you get into painting, you're like, why did I buy this stuff? I didn't even need that. Whereas if you wait until you're like, oh yeah, I like this, I enjoy this, I want to explore this a bit more, then you can go into the shop and be like, yeah, I know that I need a bigger brush, or I know I need this really tiny brush, which before I walked in and was like, when are you ever going to use that? And now I've realized that I do use that a lot. Maybe you realized that you need a lot more white paint. At least this is what I find. You need a lot more white paint than any other color paint. So every time you go into the shop, you're like, yep, I need 2 white paints because that is the one that's going to be depleted the most. It's through action and practicing that you find out what you do and don't need in terms of supplies. I almost made the same mistake, which is why I'm highlighting it, because it might be like obvious, but when I talked about I started making zines, I was very close to buying like one of these cutting boards and what's it called? Not a box cutter, but like a paper cutter, like a knife. I was close to buying that because I was like, oh, if I'm doing zines and I want to do my own binding, I'm going to need this. I was really close to bulk buying colored card to make the covers of my zines. It was really tempting. And like, if I had continued making the zines, maybe I would have needed those things. But as it was, that was just like a little phase that I went through, and which, to be honest, I want to go back to because I see the zine that I've made every so often. I look at it, I'm like, that was really cool. I want to go back to that feeling and like see what else I can create. If I had been like, yes, I must buy all this stuff, that stuff would now be sitting around unused. And we can also, the flip side, be like, oh, but if I don't buy this thing, that means I'm not going to be a painter. Like if I don't buy all of this paint stuff and this equipment, it means that I'm not going to be a painter. As with anything, I think you will find a way. Like if you really want to paint, you're not going to be held back by the fact that you don't have a palette. You're just going to be like, oh, I'll just use newspaper then and put my paints on newspaper and mix my paints on a bit of newspaper, right? If you really want to do something, you'll find a way to do it. Don't buy things either out of fear of, oh my gosh, what if I need this? Or out of fear of, oh, but if I don't buy this, then I'm not going to be motivated to do something. It's the same thing as like buying clothes in a size smaller when you're trying to lose weight. I personally don't think that's helpful, because then you've just got something you can't use that you look at and you're like, okay. But if you buy clothes in the size you are now, even if you're also trying to lose weight, you then have something you can use and wear now. If at any point you do lose weight and you are successful in what you're trying to do, you can then give those things away, wear them, but just they'll be baggier than before. You know, like don't make any decisions out of fear. I think hobbies are really important for spending time with yourself, getting to know yourself, giving yourself time out. Like instead of scrolling on your phone, you can be like, oh, I want to do some more work on my painting, right? It gives you something outside of just being at work or being online, scrolling on Instagram Reels. It gives you something physical as well to work with if we're talking about doing a painting. I know you can also do like digital collage, or you can draw on your iPad, or you can do like puzzles online, but having something that you can physically engage with and something that you can be creative with, that you can see progress with, I think is so valuable. And it's teaching you a lesson. You're learning about yourself. You're learning about the process of getting better at something. And this is why I'm so opposed to AI art on all levels. It's not even art. It's just like stealing what other people have done and mishmashing it into a thing. And other people online have made really articulate videos about this. So I will leave Drew Gooden's video because that one is really helpful on this topic. Why do I want to look at a piece of art that no one was even bothered to create? It doesn't say anything. It was made by a computer that's unaware of any of the wider nuances or influences. It's completely soulless. And again, that's not to say you have to suffer for your art or whatever, but it's like when I look at a painting that I made, I know not only did that, I enjoyed the process of making that, the colours are saying something to me. Like I look at it and I have a reaction to it, like emotionally. I think it's so valuable to spend time being creative and developing hobbies. And I know I've spent a lot of time talking about like artistic creative ones, but I mean, I mentioned my sister does running. Not only are hobbies something you can do by yourself, you know, doing your painting, you can join a painting class, right? These are all options as well. But if you want something just to spend time doing, like I said, on a random Thursday, or you're feeling sad on a Saturday, you can be like, yeah, let's put on an episode of Law and Order in the background while I do some painting and some work on this thing. Hobbies can also be social. You could join any kind of sports club, right? A running club, take tennis lessons, try some yoga classes, try some Pilates, go swimming at your local pool. You could learn a language, like take some language classes. There is so much. There will be something that speaks to you. You will learn like, oh, I can get better. You will see your progress. It is such a rewarding experience. I mentioned briefly writing. That's another one where it's like, this is not necessarily performative. This is just because I have an idea in my head and I want to try and get it down on paper. I want to develop a whole different world, get inside the mind of a different character. It's so rewarding. And anyone who doesn't have a hobby, I would so encourage you. I hope what I've said in this video has encouraged you to think about how you can see progress and how you don't have to be good at the start. Like you can be a beginner. You're allowed to be a beginner and not be good. You can look at what you've made. It doesn't say anything about you in terms of, oh, I'm not a good drawer. Like, so what? You still made something that didn't exist before. That is what I think is so cool. You literally created something. You took a blank piece of paper and you made it into something different. That to me is like magic, honestly. Like, that is so cool. My hobbies are reading, making videos, making collages, painting, drawing. Like, I feel so creatively fulfilled because I have so many different things that I know I can do at any time. I don't paint all the time, but I know that when I want to, I can do that, and I've spent time like cultivating that skill. I feel like it's such a nice way to connect with your emotions, to connect with other people. It can be so powerful, so meaningful, and so rewarding. And so I hope that you can develop some hobbies and experiment and see what you like to do. Please let me know how you get on in the comments. I really hope this has encouraged you to do that. I will leave my video 12 tips to get out of a creative slump because that links quite nicely to what we've been talking about here. So I'll leave that on the screen if you want to watch that next. God bless. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.